Tonight, we're going to talk to one of Milford's favorite sons, especially around budget time when he brings tidings of joy and many presents. If somebody doesn't know you, why don't we start with an introduction?
John Fernandes, State Representative, representing the towns of Milford, Mendon, Hopedale, and Medway.
And one street.
Well, it's a little bit more than one street, but I own the town.
I was going to say, I love this. I think we should give one street away in Milford to somebody else.
So we can always have two reps.
So we have two reps
Yeah.
advocating, because you had said before, you can't advocate for one precinct.
Can't ask where you live. Can't ask if the project's going to help one precinct.
Biggest issue always at this time of year is budget.
Yep. Well, we just, in the House, well, the governor put out his budget, of course, and it was a thoughtful budget, but obviously it gets to the House, and the House Ways and Means Committee releases its version, which is different in kind and in certain spots from the governor's budget, and then we moved to amendments. There were, I don't know, only about 1,500 amendments filed to the budget.
How many are real amendments versus I want $50 for the local Boy Scouts?
Well, you know, actually the budget becomes a vehicle in what we call the outside sections, which are not line items to a budget. Imagine that you did the local budget, but at the end of it, you put in changes to the bylaws as a part of the budget, the general bylaws. Well, that's what will happen to legislators who may be frustrated that some of their bills among the 5,000 bills that get filed every year don't seem to be making progress through committees. They'll actually file them as outside sections of the budget and say, well, this has budget implications, therefore we should pass this piece into law through there. I got to say, Ways and Means is pretty disciplined in kicking a lot of those out and saying, work with the committees on those. You know, at least a dozen, if not more, pieces of legislation that are in the Judiciary Committee were efforted that way unsuccessfully, I will say. But you put it all together, and most of those amendments are about silos, right? So every silo inside that budget has its champion or champions. Mm-hmm. And every one of those silos, without doubt, could use more funding than either the governor or House Ways and Means assigns to it. And so we become the ones trying to seek those changes through the amendments. In addition, of course, we as individual legislators will seek to secure funding for projects within our community, what I like to call targeted local aid.
Is that the new word?
Yes, as opposed to earmarks.
Earmarks and pork?
Targeted local aid. Yeah, we don't get a lot of pork at our level. It's hard to hide a real bad program inside of an earmark at the state level. So things like, you know, Ernie Horn up in Mendon was looking for, you know, some money for radio equipment. I was able to get $25,000 into the House budget earmarked for that project. Similar kind of thing in Hopedale. We did some work. You know, we've been funding the youth center operation to some extent with $50,000 there, which isn't,
and again, it may seem like 50 grand is nothing in the billions that you're actually allocating, but I'll bet if you went to the youth center board,
makes
that
a big
50
difference.
grand made a huge difference to
well,
them.
a couple of years ago when we did it was like 27,000 for radio equipment for Hopedale. It was money they just hadn't been able to find in their budget year after year for equipment, and it made the difference between radio communication in certain parts of Hopedale where they really had dead silence, and it had reared its head in a couple of 911 situations. So it was a big deal for them. I mean, last year we also did, we helped the Mendon Library with $50,000 for energy efficient windows. I mean, they were struggling to get that project done, and every penny and dime counts, and they were able to, you know, get some relief from the pressure they were under through that. So it's not that these are going to any kind of bad projects. In fact, this year, among the traditional things I've tried to do, in an effort to sort of help with this issue that's going on with the RTA into Milford, which is something that I've been working with both local officials and the RTA folks for the 10 years I've been in office. We were able to secure an earmark of $75,000. Now, if it gets done in the Senate, gets approved by the governor, or if the governor vetoes overridden, we still have that always with earmarks. Will he release the money?
Right.
Because they often hold the earmarks into early period of the next year to make sure that we're on target with our monthly averages.
Well, when you think about the estimates,
yeah, well, that's what they are.
By the time
estimates.
they figure out, is the revenue really what they expected? You know, it's like when they threatened to cut local aid, and I know you were supporting us, and they talked about doing it mid-year. It's like, guys, that's a double impact.
Right, right.
You know, so if you cut my budget $10 at the beginning of the year, I got 12 months to make it up. Come January, February.
And that's why these earmarks are often held, because they're usually one-time kind of projects. And the governor, who has that authority, wants to see that we're getting through the year where he feels comfortable that these aren't the places we need to go first, because certainly when the recession hit, earmarks went out the window and they were gone for, I mean, they got cut the year it hit in 2008, and they were gone for several years after as a consequence. There just wasn't the space. But if all things work out, that $75,000, if it gets into the Senate budget and gets through the governor, I would expect to be able to come back to help offset the cost of the town of piloting this project out and see how it works. And also was able to secure in the House budget $87,000 for an opioid prevention and treatment program along the lines of what Amy Leone was talking to the town about several months ago in terms of trying to seed a local program that would fill some space. And Amy and I have talked about this with the chief. There are all of a sudden a lot of things going on out there in the opioid prevention, treatment, education, and prosecution of those responsible for putting it on the street. But so there's a lot of effort going on. Every community has its own unique problems, yet still. So the question that I've posed to Amy and the chief is, what could we do in Milford that would fill a space that's not being filled right now? Let's not try to fill the space that somebody else is filling.
Right.
What can we do here that would be effective? And particularly to Amy and the chief, who see this problem on a daily basis from slightly different perspectives, but in collaboration, they see what's working. They see what might get to somebody before they get addicted. What would be the thing that, because there's a lot of stuff out there growing for folks who are already addicted. The question is, you see folks on a regular basis who are in those early stages. Guys, the chief, you see the warning signs, guys on the street, girls on the street. Amy, you see it in your counseling. What's that space in there? That's the space I'd like to see us fill.
How can we keep these kids from going over the edge?
Right. What's that space we can fill? You know, is it, you know, my view of the world on this kind of thing is there's a population of kids, and I call them kids, but young adults who are out of school, haven't left the community to go to college, haven't left the community to go to work, may not have the best jobs in the world. They're jobs, but they feel a little dead-ended by it. And when a lot of your friends have picked up and left to go to school or go to other places to take chances doing certain things, and they're not around, I don't call it a loneliness, I think there's an aloneness where you feel like you are alone. Maybe there are other people around and it's not completely lonely, but you're not in the same space you used to be in. And it becomes easy for people in that age group of 18 to 25, 26, 28 to fall into this pattern of getting into, hey, having a couple of drinks every night, meeting folks at the bar, just hanging out where other people are, even so you're not lonely, but you're still alone. You're not really hanging with those people. You don't know them real well.
Trying to deaden the pain, but
and you
it's
end
still
up,
there.
and people end up in this situation where, you know, the drug becomes an easy take at the beginning, but the quality and potency of the drug that's on the street today is incredibly dangerous, and it's addictive in such a fast fashion. So we have those kids who may be placed on painkillers because of sports injuries. and they can be hooked in a matter of days. That's one population. And then there's the population that kind of matures into it in that age group. And so my thought to Amy was, what can we do in that space that can kind of help take away that aloneness feeling? When I lived in Boston, I was saying to her, there was this sort of hybrid restaurant bar across the street from where I lived that was called Our House. And what it was a place where you walked in and there were a bunch of different rooms. One room had a bunch of sofas and a TV. Next room had a pool table. Next room had a small restaurant area we could sit down and eat. Next room had a small bar. Another room had some music where people could go in and either listen or dance. It was really, so like, this is our house. You know, we got a bunch of different places, pick your room. And when I would go in there, I never felt alone. There was always some place to kind of hang that was a little different. And I've always thought that one of the things that addiction does is it makes people feel very alone, and they're looking for something more than you lecturing them. They're looking for sort of an adult youth center, someplace that they can go
I was thinking it's
and
kind of
hang
an extension
out.
of the youth center.
It really is. It's sort of this adult youth center where people can find opportunities, and inside of those opportunities you can build in educational and supportive services that people can access as they want to access them or need them. But it's really hard for people to just walk into a drop-in center or to a place where they walk in and sort of say, okay, I'm here because. It's tough for people in addiction. So anyway, the concept we've been talking about is there something we can do with this seed money that might get us in that direction to help in a different way to address? Where's the empty space in the opioid treatment addiction prevention thing where we might be able to do something?
But to set up an adult youth center, you're not going to do that on 80 grand.
That depends on what you want to do. It depends on what the space is that's available. What can you find for space? I'm not talking about all at once having this unscaled, huge project. I'm talking about what can you do in some reasonably available space to create an opportunity for folks to come in and relax and not necessarily feel I'm here just to talk about what I think I may have a problem with.
It's not a meeting.
Yeah,
That, Hi, my name is.
It's not the place you have to go to where, you know, look. I mean, what I was talking about is you kind of go out in that 18 to 28-year-old range, and where do you go on a night? You go to a bar. What do? You pick up a drink. Well, how about a place where you don't have to pick up a drink? How about a place where there's a different opportunity to be there?
Yeah, but even like you're saying, a bar, you're kind of dulling the pain, but the pain isn't going away because.
Not at all. The aloneness isn't going away.
You're sitting at a bar and next to a stranger, and okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, this is random thought in my head. Doesn't mean it's the right place to go, but I have a lot of respect for Amy and Chief O'Loughlin and the work that they've done in this area. And so what I'm trying to say is, hey, look, here's some money towards what you were trying to do. Maybe there's opportunity to collect some other money from other sources. And what can you do in this space? Tell me what you can do. Because, look, if you seed something out the first year and it seems like it's having success, you can seed it out in subsequent years for a few years anyway to try and get it to root.
Also, if the community sees that it's working, if they come to understand it. I mean, Milford's always been supportive of programs that help residents. You know, I mean, the youth center kind of is, I can't say a small version of what you're talking about at $5 million. But
no, it's not. But you think about it, we recognize that this problem exists for our youth up until really about the age of 18. The youth center is really directed at high school, high school and lower kids, high school and lower age kids. And we certainly recognize it for our seniors, right? And so for the vast majority of the rest of us who are out there with jobs and working and the rest, it makes sense that you don't really need that kind of thing. You find your own entertainment, you find your own way, you're raising kids, you're doing your thing. But that age group, from my experience between the 18 out of high school and 25, 26, 28-year-old group, they're young adults, but they're old kids. And they need guidance yet still in their life. And they need the feeling of there's a future here, when maybe at the moment it doesn't feel like there's a future.
But, you know, I hadn't thought about that gap group, because you sit there and say, okay, you bum get a job. No, I got a job. I'm working. Maybe not the best job.
Right.
So, you know, you're not taking homeless people who, you know, people turn their back on and say, I'm not going to provide any more for you. These are, some of them, kids, young adults are working. And they're just falling into the trap because, like you said, it's not exciting, and
look,
all my friends have left me.
We expect our kids and we expect our young adult children to be risk takers. We want them to be risk takers. The question is, are you going to take good risks or are you going to take bad risks? And part of the ability to take good risks is to yet still have guidance. 18 to 28-year-olds haven't all of a sudden, because they're young adults, lost the need for guidance. Right. They still need it and they want it, and actually in some respects I think they're mature enough to understand that, but maybe not always mature enough to seek it out. Because there's an embarrassment that maybe I'm not with the group that has already gone and done all that stuff yet. But hey, we know some of our best entrepreneurs in America and around the world are people who didn't do the 4-year traditional college thing, right? You know, they sometimes are just on a different path, and so the question is, can you grab them before they fall prey to that loneliness or aloneness and that opportunity to kind of hang with folks that say, well, hey, what the heck, let's just get high.
But it is amazing because, okay, they walk on the high school field, and they go in people's minds from you're a kid to now you're an adult.
And they're not.
You know, well, it's only a day difference from yesterday.
They're not. No, I think there's a lot of guidance still needed in that decade between graduation from high school and before you hit 30. I mean, guidance is something you want all your life. I still call people for guidance, right? And I'm going to be 64, but I think in that there's this critical period of time in that decade that is so important, and that's why you'll see so many of the young people and young adults who we see suffering and even dying from this are in that sort of that age group. And I think some of it's because they became addicted accidentally to the drugs. Now that we know how addictive these prescription opioids can be, we need to move away from those, and we're doing that with the medical profession in terms of the prescription nature of what we give to our athletes, young athletes. But I think the other avenue is what we've talked about here. And my hope is not just in this small way, because sometimes you use a small amount of money to try and seed an idea, but that we continue to focus on not just the treatment, but prevention in a way that recognizes the importance of that concept.
Well, I remember when young Joe Kennedy came on, and he told us a story about his physician wanting to give him Oxy, and him saying, I'll take 3 pills. Yeah. And no, you should take whatever it was, a dozen or a 2. He said, no, I only want 3. You know, and here's somebody who obviously is intelligent, and he was making a decision, yet his physician is pushing him in a way that he goes, I'm only going to use 3, if I use 3. Then what do I want to do with a bottle sitting at home unused?
And look, we all face that. The governor tells a similar story about going to a dentist. That story can be repeated over and over again. And the explosion of the prescription mentality, I don't blame particularly on doctors alone by any stretch. Look, it's a pharmaceutical industry that you understand is multi billions of dollars in terms of the scope of the thing. But at the same time, we get down into the weeds and we recognize there are other things that may drive this. Physicians get rated on how their patients say
they feel
in terms of pain. So what's a physician supposed to do? Well, look, you're in pain, I should give you medicine. And by the way, I know in the back of my head, you know, somebody sends you a survey and you say, hell, I was in pain for another 2 weeks and I really didn't feel like I should have been. They didn't do anything to help me with that pain. Doctors get rated on that. You know, we're changing, through the things that we're doing legislatively and administratively, we're trying to change that mentality. And I got to say that certainly at our facility here in Milford, at the Milford Regional Medical Center, the docs and folks involved up there have really stepped up to the plate to try to even get in the game with the opioid bill that we did, where Jeff Hopkins, who's the chief up there and is actually going to be president of the Massachusetts Emergency Room Physicians in the coming year, you know, they had 3 or 4 pieces of amendments to the legislation that they would like to have seen, and because of my relationship with Jeff, he asked me to carry those, and we actually were successful in getting some hybrid of all of them in there. But they were stepping up, saying, hey, we want, for instance, greater report carding of how we're comparing to our peers. Even if it's just informative and not punitive, we just want reporting so we understand what others are doing. I mean, that was one of the things they were kind of moving into the space of. So I'll say that the docs are stepping up and understanding the problem is greater than just treatment, that it's got to be prevention.
Well, you put a lot of your own political clout into fentanyl. Well,
I
not
did.
into fentanyl, but into the control of.
Well, you know, I'm not sure I put a lot of political clout into it. It was once recognized as a problem area that we didn't. We have our levels of drug offenses, so possession is one level, distribution is another level, and think of the user versus the street dealer. And then you get into trafficking, and now you're talking about the business person who doesn't even want to touch the drug because they know better.
They know better than to use their own product.
We saw this huge spike in fentanyl, which is an extremely powerful medicine used in very carefully prescribed circumstances in hospital settings, showing up on the street as part of the heroin mix. And that cocktail is incredibly dangerous, kills in a matter of minutes, and no one knows what's there. And worse yet, still, the fentanyl isn't even the pharmaceutically controlled fentanyl. The cartels are simply manufacturing it.
You can just make it. It's a pretty simple.
But it's like anything else that you make. The quality and predictability of the fentanyl is not there.
When you're making something that you know is going to kill a certain percentage of your customers, not sure.
And they don't care and you don't care.
Right, and the quality really comes in to say, are we doing enough quality control? Are we making it in a clean environment so that we don't hurt our customers before we kill them?
Well, you would think, though, that they would be mindful of that, right? You don't want to take out your base customers.
You just make more.
It's just, it's amazing to me.
Yes, but John, I've said all along, to understand their mentality, you'd have to be as sick as they are.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing. But in any event, we didn't have in our trafficking schedule fentanyl scheduled as a trafficking offense. So the most we could charge anybody with was distribution. And when that was brought to my attention, because I was working with the Attorney General saying, look, there's got to be ways we can switch our attention just from the prevention and treatment side, and you know, this is your job, your law enforcement. It's my job in terms of chairing a judiciary committee to look both at the civil and criminal side of this thing. What more can we do to put pressure on the traffickers? And this is one of the things that popped. And you know, some people said, oh, well, you know, is it that big a deal? Well, you know, we made, I think it was 10 grams, or I think we made 10 grams, the trafficking level. It's the amount that you could put in a sleeve of a finger of a glove. And just either today or yesterday, there was a bust on the south coast of somebody who had 31 grams of it. So it's still on the street. Just last week or the week before, Joe Early and the Fitchburg mayor or Fitchburg or Leominster, were on the air warning people that there was a bad batch swinging through Worcester County that had caused several overdoses and a couple of deaths.
And that's the hardest thing for me to understand when they announce there's a bad batch of heroin out there.
Laced with fentanyl that was coming through the
district. Okay, so there's a good batch of heroin out? There's
a batch that doesn't kill, and there's a batch that kills.
Kills instantly.
And if you're talking about good and bad in the context of criminal behavior and trying to save lives, when there's a bad batch that kills, you got to get the word out on the street.
But it was just amazing when I heard there's a bad batch of heroin.
Yeah.
And, you know.
But it hits a neighborhood. It hits a community. And it hits a neighborhood where you have, you know, a dozen overdoses and a couple of deaths. I mean, it's that sensitive a situation out there, and to, you know, give the tool to law enforcement to, you know, charge on the trafficking of the fentanyl, because look, they're smart enough to know, hey, look, I can put heroin on the street, or I can put fentanyl on the street. Yeah, trafficking, not trafficking.
I was going to say, the heroin I get hit hard, the fentanyl I get slapped.
So there are situations where people have been found with just the fentanyl in their possession. And so we wanted to make sure that was scheduled appropriately for action. So, you know, I'm glad we were moving in that space. So.
So now it always comes down at this time to say local aid.
Local aid, the House did better than the governor did. You know, in Chapter 70 there was some additional uptick there and some other areas. The governor, you know, in the local aid itself, in terms of the anticipated increase in revenue,
The cherry sheets.
the number that put in was reflective of what the average increase in revenue was. So I think I think local aid is well represented in the budget.
Well, I'm glad to see that you're doing better than the governor, because our budget's based on the governor's proposal.
Yeah,
So
it's
as
a
long
little
as
bit better. Don't go too far. It's a little
Well,
bit
no,
better.
but as long as you're debating between the floor that the governor set and what you want, our budget will be okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, we're not. I mean, there was nothing in the governor's budget that would lead us to want to go below what he did. And look, you know, he's in the same position we are. You've got to set out what your priorities are and try and fill those silos with what you can, recognizing that as it moves through the legislature, the House and Senate are going to have some different views of the world. So I think the budget, you know, is a fairly well.
It doesn't sound like there's any. I mean, you have certain years where there's certain projects or areas that become very, very contention-driven. You know, that the House may not like what the governor wants to cut or add, or the Senate has their. I haven't heard anything this year.
Well, you have to be in the building, and you'll hear it. You know, obviously, I have a great interest in the judiciary. That's part of my life, and it's part of what my responsibility is as chair of Judiciary Committee. The judiciary took got some additional monies in both budgets, but in terms of where they feel they need to be to where they are, we didn't get them there. We're still working that. There's always pressure. You know, we have a lot of people who work in our DA services and our public counsel services that do so for a lot less money they could get on the street, and trying to get them a little bit of an increase in raise money. It's just there's a lot of people doing that work, and the numbers can get pretty big. So, and there were areas of, you know, some other areas like adult day health and some others where we didn't get everything we wanted. So, I could give you a list of people if you want to talk to them who aren't real satisfied with either budget and are now talking in the ear of Karen Spilka, chairman of Senate Ways and Means, who I think is releasing her budget next week.
So they couldn't get it through your Ways and Means, so now go to the Senate and see if you can.
It's a dance that goes on every year.
Is it really any different from last year or the year before?
Every year it goes on. But I think we're in fairly decent shape. There was no money taken out of the rainy day fund to fund this year's budget, reducing the one-time, you know, revenue sources. There's always pressure from the feds in terms of how much money we get from them and where we may be losing money.
Well, because of the Medicare and Medicaid and all of the health.
You know, there's still a lot of pent-up energy and demand from the recession. People looking to try and do more, get back to where they were. The judiciary being an example. I mean, even though we've done a lot over the last couple of years for the judiciary, in all honesty, they're still below their numbers of, you know, 10 years ago. So, but they're actually, I'm very impressed with the work that the new administration is doing within the courts to drive efficiencies and modernize how much we can now do online that we could never do online before. So that's really helpful. But there's just many things that I think went well in the budget this year.
The effect of the Obamacare on the state budget?
Healthcare services in general are year after year eating up a greater portion of our state budget.
But it seems
It's
like
not
we
so
had
much.
a good system.
It took a couple of years to get it integrated, but there are aspects of the federal program that were better than ours and gave us better return on investment and you know, more portability and other kinds of things that once we integrated the systems and got over the computer glitch that was a disaster, I I think there's general agreement that the system's working pretty well right now.
Yeah, but even during the computer glitch, you know, people calling for scrapping it, it's like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Can't do that. Yeah, you can't let execution get in the way of good policy.
You know, if it's going to,
you got to execute. That's understandable. You can't just say, "Hey, we can't execute it right now, therefore we're going to scrap the policy."
We're going to run into a bump, so we're done.
Yeah, you can't do that. You got to get through the reality that mistakes were made, correct those mistakes, get it in place, and if it's good policy, it will stand on its own. And you look back to say, what were those mistakes? Is somebody responsible, or was it just the growing pains of trying to make a change? Because there's both of those things that happen.
I guess to anybody who's implemented a new ERP in the company, where you hear that going from the old computer system to the new will be seamless, and then you go through the months of agony to make it seamless. When you think about a statewide system, I guess I just wasn't really surprised that they ran into some bugs.
There were things that could have been avoided and should have been avoided, but I think implementing something that big, you know, has its natural failures built into it. And it's funny you say that. I was over at Tri-County the other day. Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary of Education were down for a tour, and Tri-County is one of our successes in the manufacturing caucus work because several years ago, they had dropped their manufacturing. We did a roundtable down there, and they saw that there was a demand within their catchment area, a great demand for help in terms of manufacturing, trained manufacturing employees. And so little by little, we've overcome their fears of reintroducing reintroducing manufacturing, but in the advanced manufacturing field. And they are going to be opening an advanced manufacturing wing down there, and the Secretary was in and the Lieutenant Governor to look at it. But one of their robotics groups was preparing for a skills competition that took place up at Blackstone Valley last Friday. And, you know, we were interviewing them, and the Lieutenant Governor asked one of the team members, well, what's the hardest part about this? Or what is it that you think about what you're doing? Have you learned? And it's like, what we learned in trying to build these things and design them and put them together is that expect the unexpected, and failure is inevitable, and we're just going to have to overcome each failure we have to get to where we want to be. And that's the concept of, you don't give up a good idea because you fail a couple of times or mistakes occur. And so execution can't drive policy. Policy has to drive execution.
You always go through where you say adversity creates character. And I laugh and I say, no, it doesn't. It demonstrates character. Because the people who run into these roadblocks and just, okay, let's figure out, we know where we want to go. Let's figure out how to get there. We'll go over this bump or around it. You know, it's a life lesson.
Life is complicated. I've described it to my kids as you come up against a series of walls every time you move forward. And somewhere in that wall there's an opening. You just got to keep prodding and pushing and elbowing until you find it. And by the way, it doesn't do any good to stand back and scream at it.
Right. The wall won't go away.
Wall's not going to answer. And you may just draw attention from people on the wall who want to make it harder for you. So, you know, it's inevitable that you're going to, that when you take risks, you're going to have failures involved. And when you try to drive new policy and big policy, there are going to be mistakes made. If you want to focus on the execution mistakes, you focus on the execution mistakes. My view of the world is, when it finally gets executed right, it's either going to be good policy or bad policy. That's what you ought to be watching. Was it good policy or bad policy? And I think our integration into that system, to the point, has worked out pretty well.
Well, I mean, I always found it amazing when people debated, are they going to give health care to everybody? It's like, you are one way or another.
That's the bottom line of what we've done here with our program in Massachusetts and what the federal program was based on. Healthcare costs us all. And the whole point of insurance is shared risk.
Right. And
when you share the risk, you can reduce the costs. So there's sharing the risk of the cost, which was one aspect of this, and then there's cost controlled, which was another aspect of this, and there's cost assignment, which is another aspect. We want consistency in cost assignment.
Anybody who really believed some sick child is going to show up at the hospital emergency room and Jeff Hopkins is going to say no visa, no entry, It wasn't going to happen.
You know, it's not allowed under federal law, and it's not going to be. It's not any physician.
Law aside,
it's not any physician.
No physician is going to turn his back or her back.
It's not a physician's oath, and it's not going to happen. So, no, I think it's worked out well, and happy.
So now you talk about it's been part of your life. Life's going to change a little bit.
Life is going to change a little bit. Yes, yeah. I'm not going to run for re-election.
Yeah, what's with that? You said you were going to do 10 years. You did 10 years, and you actually lived up to your promise. Is that allowed on Beacon Hill?
No, I'm really sorry. I want to apologize for that. I actually toyed with not doing that, as you well know. No, when I ran 10 years ago, I was 54 years old, and I knew that that's what I would be when I took office, and that 10 years later, if I was going to continue practice law, which I wanted to do, that this was going to be, you know, a really hard drive for me to do both things and do them well, and I hope that people feel that I have. But it's a long day, and it's an exponentially more difficult day sometimes, just switching back and forth between them. But that's something I chose. It's not a complaint, and I certainly didn't do it for the money, because it's not more. Working the two difference, it's less.
You're taking a 75% cut in pay.
But the truth is that, you know, it felt like when I started that if I did 10 years at 64, feeling healthy, wanting to continue to work.
But you still got a shot at doing something else.
Right, something else. And so it was only this term, by getting the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee, which really, for me, is sort of a penultimate capstone of a career in law and a career in government, right? I mean, I've been 33 years in the law, and I've been about that many years in public service over the last 43 years. You get the opportunity to bring the two together, and it's really an extremely fulfilling opportunity to be able to work with judicial-related issues, justice-related issues, and bring, you know, that skill set and knowledge base that I've accumulated over that period of time to a single place and work with it. And, you know, doing things like alimony reform, child custody reform, mortgage reform, criminal justice reform, these various things that I've had the opportunity to work on over the last several years, but particularly the last 18 months, it's incredibly fulfilling. And so it was very tempting, and I had actually decided that, you know, I'll do 2 more years. I can get out at 66 and still have that one more swing at the bat. Let me do 2 more. And as of, you know, mid-March, that's what I was doing. You know, as of December, that's what I felt I would do. As of mid-March, that's what I was doing. And frankly, and quite honestly, with some reticence, because I knew the 10 years was a right number, but I just wasn't sure if I was getting a little tired, to be honest. And then when my mother-in-law got sick, sort of the last week of March, and was in the hospital, very intense involvement by the family in that last week of her illness before she passed away, and then the next week as we stretched out through the week, the ceremony. Well, you know, it's not, look, she lived to be 91 years old and was very active right up until her passing.
No, I don't mean about her.
Yeah.
She had a great life.
Yeah.
But that mirror.
Well, what it was, actually what triggered the brightness for this to me was during that 2-week period of her illness and then the ceremony, there wasn't a single day that I could spend the entire day with my wife.
Yeah.
That despite very good staff in both locations really being helpful, every day I had to attend to something in one of those businesses and one of those professions, and I felt like doing these 2 things has left me at this point in my life with too small a margin of personal time, and that really what I want to do is collect my life back into a single job responsibility, and whether it's just practicing law as I've done in the community at a softer pace, or whether it's doing something different, I don't know, but I want to collect myself into a single place. And it made sense 10 years ago, it made sense 6 months ago, it makes even more sense today. So
you're not sending out little notes saying, Liz, I got time, I'm ready to be a grandfather?
No, Liz is cautiously staying in New York, and
well, it's better than California.
Well, you'll have to talk to her about that.
Well, no, I'm saying for you.
Yeah.
No, forget her. I mean, I love Liz, but
it's good. It's good to have her close by. But more importantly, is she's pursuing something she really loves, and that's great. So she's feeling pretty fulfilled in what she does every day.
Well, I mean, that's
So-
what matters, but it's certainly nice to have them around.
But there are things that, you know, that the schedule is very demanding, and particularly with the local events that I feel are very much a part of my job, and things that I want to be at, that people appreciate me being at as a state official, not because it's me, but as a state official, it gives a sense of commitment to it. I feel very strongly that those are things I have to do, and there have been times where, you know, Jennifer will say, hey, can we do this or can we do that? And it's like, you know, I really can't. I've
So
got a
Jen
commitment.
hasn't woken up to, oh my God, you're going to be home at night?
No, she's actually of this idea that this is going to be good. So talk to me in 6 months after
I was going to say.
I'm
you
out
know,
and see if she's still in that mindset, or if the kids are, or if they've moved further away than they are today. I don't know. Or you may be feeling haunted by me. Who knows?
There you go.
No, it was a very tough decision, and it remains so in some ways, a little
Well,
bit of
especially
a
you've done
bittersweet.
so much for us.
Wow.
You're kind of at, you know, you're the big Poppy routine where you're going out on top.
Yeah, there you go.
made it.
There you go.
You know, you've hit your 500 home runs. You've got your name. What's left? But kind of a nice place to walk out on.
You know, it is, you know, I do feel like I'm at a very comfortable place in the game, that I could keep going and do it. And it's bittersweet in that there are things I know I'll leave on the table as unfinished business when I walk out the door on January 3rd. There's stuff that I'm working on that's
it was
unfinished
10
business,
years-
but somebody else has got to pick it up and carry it
10 years
forward.
ago when we said, okay, we're giving up, you know, when Lou left, you go through somebody who's been there a long time and they've made their way up. And all of a sudden this young John Fernandes comes in, and it's, how are you going to feel when you're the new kid on the block and you got to earn your way up the totem pole again? I would imagine it's going to be the same thing for whoever follows you.
There's no question. It doesn't, I mean, one of the things I always felt good about when I went in at the age I went in was that I did have, you know, at that point, 25 years in the business of law, as many years in local service, and I felt like, you know, there are a lot of young people who get a start in the House of Representatives. I felt like, despite the number, 160, that I was going to come in with an advantage. And I think that advantage has played out for me in terms of age and maturity and experience, being able to kind of get to places a little bit quicker in terms of relationships with people who are in leadership and the like. And you know, part of the thing I like most about serving is meeting so many different and diverse people and enjoying the company and making friends. So it's been a great run. I'm happy with it. And I appreciate people have said very kind things to me about not wanting me to leave or the service that I've delivered, which is nice because you don't hear that a lot along the way. There's sort of a quiet appreciation more than not, and sometimes you wonder because you always hear from the guys who don't like what you did. But it's been nice and it's been fun, and again, bittersweet, but I'm looking forward to see what the next 10 years bring.
When somebody first asked me, did you hear? I said, yes. They said, what do you think? I said, happy bummer. I'm happy for him. It's a bummer for us because we are losing somebody who is, well, I won't say losing. We're taking a hiatus until you figure out what you're going to do next to help the community.
Well, we'll see. But it's been, people have been very kind, as I say, and I really do appreciate the kind words, yours and others, about it, because it, you know, it does make me feel good that what I've done over the last 10 years has made a difference in some way to some people. And certainly, one of the things, you know, it's part of why I enjoy doing legal work is, you know, you can make a difference on a day-to-day basis in a single person's life. Yeah. You know, people come to me in the law practice because something big is going on in their life. It's a good thing and they're really trying to get off on the road with it, or it's a bad thing and they're trying to get out from under it. And when you have some success on either of those sides, it's really rewarding to know that you helped a family or a person or
well, we'll have another show
business.
as we get closer
Yeah.
to really wrap it. But, you know, when you say trying to get out from under, EPA edicts.
We've made progress. We made progress. The EPA's permit is there now. We've delayed it for 7 or 8 years, but more important than delaying it, I think that collectively, a lot of people, certainly in our district, from Dick Moore previously to Richie Neal to Joe Kennedy stepping in and others, other legislators and people at the state level, we got a message to the EPA that cost matters in terms of policy.
Well,
And
remember when they first started, it was almost our entire annual budget they were talking about.
It's certainly changed. The goals remain the same. The timelines for implementation have changed. The methodologies for implementations have changed. The administrative responsibilities have changed. And while there is still a cost, that cost is I think, going to turn out to be significantly less to try and achieve the goals of reductions of the phosphorus and nutrients into the rivers to make them drinkable and swimmable as the federal mandate would ask.
You and Dick started with the, why don't we catch it at the source? Why are we still chasing it at the tail?
Yeah. No, that's true, because what became clear to me was we are penalizing the non-polluters, which is not the typical way in which you do this. Somebody manufactures cars and puts those cars on the road and builds them in such a way that they cause stuff that gets into the air that comes back into our rivers and drives this phosphorus issue. Fertilizers, the same thing. Natural degradation of trees and leaves and things. So, you know, we picked one part of that, which seemed like a possibility to do on the local level, state level, which was to take on the phosphorus nutrient issue, and successfully did that. And ironically, even though we were targeting EPA to show them you can do it, you don't have to just spend money. You can try and get at the sources to reduce the pollution, thereby reduce the cleanup cost. EPA gave us an award for coming up with the legislation that reduced it, and they reduced our target numbers. So it was a win-win.
It seemed like you used the market, because when you think about the largest producer of fertilizers, when you started seeing them talk about reducing phosphate content, that's when I knew you were winning.
Yeah, it amazed me how many stakeholders there are in fertilizer, from the individual user up to the big box stores who sell it, to the manufacturers, to landscapers. I mean, it just amazed me how many. We had 20, 30 stakeholders at the table between environmental groups and retailers and others. So, but you know, that permit's going to yet still have an effect. And then the other one, the RDA, which was the targeted pilot one for Milford, Franklin, Bellingham, still is in the works. And more work will continue to need to be done on that. And I know Joe Kennedy's got it certainly on his agenda and realizes the importance of federal intervention in partnership with state officials on that.
Well, certainly it was a concern when we sat there and said, okay, our local receipts are in the $30-some million a year, and you want us to put up $60 million. So it's like one entire budget or two.
Yeah,
of the town.
The numbers were simply unmanageable, and we know that. But EPA would sit back and say, "Oh, but money's not our
we're not supposed to deal with money.
Not our mandate." But thank God we over the last 6, 7, 8 years we've made some progress with them, and I'm very pleased with that progress. Still think there's more they could have done, but you come to the point where administrations are going to change.
Sure.
The likelihood is that regional administrators will change. So you have to realize that the regional administrator, by the way, Charles River Watershed did sue. I mean, the Conservation Law Foundation did end up suing over this, so there is a lawsuit out there. But the regional administrator feels like, hey, look, I've been working on this my entire career under the Obama administration. I may not be here a year from now. I got to pull the trigger on this and get it in place. And I think that did play a role, along with the time it had already been delayed, is that, look, we're reaching a watershed point here with a change in administrations, and that may mean me, and I'm not leaving this behind.
So now we talk about change in administration. Your overview on the circus we're in the middle of?
Which one would that be?
I'm trying to decide. I think last year I said my biggest nightmare was going into a voting booth and having the choice of Donald the Rump and the Liar. And here my nightmare is almost coming true so far.
Well, it's pretty clear at this point in time to, I think, everyone's surprise that the November election will feature Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And people will certainly have a clear choice. And you can see that people are struggling with that choice on both sides.
I wish I had a clear choice.
Well, it's a clear choice between what their policies would be if
Donald
elected.
has policies?
Well, based upon what he says, there are policies.
Okay.
And based upon what she says, there are policies, and there are differences. But in terms of people with negatives, yeah, the unfortunate part of this is they both have high negatives. And I'm disappointed in that because I think that, and it's hard on the national scene, you know that the pattern has become, and we've seen it seep down to the local level. I'm going to beat you by beating you. I'm going to beat you up,
John,
and we drive the negatives.
In your election, it was a clear pivot point when the campaign went negative. Just recently, in a selectman's election, I don't know that it really changed how the outcome would be. But there certainly was a reaction to a negative ad.
I think,
does the Donald Trumpness really play out in
well,
a place like Milford?
I think when you get, the closer you get to the candidates being known by the public, the less effective negative advertising is. Because when somebody sends out a mailer that says, Al Correa is this.
Right.
Well, if you know Al Correa, you say, well, no, that's not who Al Correa is. So I'm not just not impressed, I'm now angry. Yeah. And it reflects badly on the opponent. But when you get to the national level.
My mother, to this day, doesn't think of you as a Fernandes. She remembers the number in the heights
yeah.
that
but that's
you
the
grew
point.
up.
Yeah, that's the point.
You know, and it was like, well, that nice boy from whatever, 30, whatever it was, and I was like, yeah. She goes, oh. And you could just see, like, okay, why are they picking on that nice boy from the heights?
You know, but when you get to the national level, you know, a really wise person once said to me, you better be sharp in your marketing, because the average voter gives about 5 minutes a day to politics. Yeah. And it could be that a fireman got an unusual animal out of a tree, or it could be the president making a big speech. Now that's somewhat skewed by the 24-hour news cycle, where certain people sit and watch the news 24 hours, and because the same station repeated a story that doesn't make a lot of sense 8 times, well, it must be true, because I've heard it 8 times.
Over and over.
And when the stations really do have political and philosophical bents, those stories do get manipulated. That kind of thing works again to drive negatives up against national candidates, because you don't know the person enough to say she isn't really like that. Trump isn't really like that. You see their visage in the way they present themselves, and you see then what other people say about the way, and somebody else makes it. You can't do that on a local level as effectively as you can do it on a national level, and it's unfortunate because both of these people are going to be coming into this campaign with very high negatives, which is not the stuff of which good campaigns about. Look, you've got a governor saying, I'm not voting for either one of these people. A governor. We got 50 governors in this country, and one of the governors says, I can't vote for either one of these people.
But if you don't vote,
you're voting for one of them somehow.
I mean, it was really sad when I saw the front page of the Globe, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was like 65% of the people say they'll never vote for Trump, and 56% say they'll never vote for Hillary.
They got to vote for somebody.
I'm going to say, a write-in?
No, at the end of the day, I think in the last few weeks of any campaign, people make a decision that they think they're going to have the most confidence in, and that will happen in this election as well down the road. So wherever the polling is today, and I saw one yesterday, it was like 54-40 or something, some pretty big numbers in favor of Clinton. Those numbers will close. The gaps close and that stuff as we get closer. And it is what it is. I wish over the 8 years of an Obama presidency, and you know, today, it's hard not to get 8 years, and it's hard to take down an incumbent presidency, so people should have been noticing, more likely 8 years, that both parties didn't do a better job of coming up with a different bullpen. I mean, the Republicans at least tried, but I didn't see of those 16 people anybody besides Trump. Not that Trump was the guy, but I didn't see among those other 16 the shining star that stood out.
No, the ones
and the Democrats didn't even put anybody forward.
I mean, the ones we thought would shine fizzled out very quickly.
You had senators and governors, but the bullpen just wasn't there and ready.
And then who would have ever thought somebody would stand up and say, I'm a socialist. I'm coming close to being the candidate for the presidency of the United States. But here we are.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting campaign swing, and we'll see what the next 6 months bring.
I'm more interested to think about the two of them, you know, Hillary and Donald Trump, how the reaction against them, because I don't see a lot of for them. When I see 65% against or 56% against, I wonder how the House and Senate races are going to be affected.
Well, I think that's where the parties are most concerned. Certainly the Republicans are very concerned about if Trump doesn't gain traction, that could have a very serious downstream negative. So, for instance, you know, if you get, and I've talked to several Republicans, even in this area, who have indicated they're either going to vote Clinton or they're just not going to vote at all. Well, if they don't go out to vote, and
they're voting Clinton.
That's, well, not just that. If there was a contested, closely
contested, you mean for the Senate? Yeah, they could be giving up a Senate seat.
Or
well, no, it's Massachusetts. You couldn't give up.
No,
a Senate.
But if in some of the other states,
yes,
where you have close elections, if people choose not to come out because they just don't feel the candidate reflects, and if they don't take seriously the downstream candidacies, then that can hurt the party.
And I would think that's the worry on Hillary Clinton's part, that Bernie and Trump both have such avid supporters that, you know, if Bernie doesn't get treated well or whatever, some of those kids may not come out.
There'll be people on both sides that don't end up coming out, but I mean, I think what I've watched and this is not that unusual situation when somebody's pretty much guaranteed they're going to get the nomination as Clinton is, she's trying real hard to stay away from the far left.
Right.
And that's costing her, therefore, primary victories. She knows it, and she's accepting it because she knows she's still going to get a percentage of the delegates she needs to get to the nomination. But rather than listing left in order to win a primary, she's trying to stay more, alienate
everybody in the middle,
or create sound bites for a later campaign. Right. She's staying more to the moderate conservative side of the primary voter, which gives the primary voter, who is more in a Democratic primary, a progressive, and in a Republican Party, a Tea Party, a right-winger, if you're really struggling for the nomination, you've got to fight for that vote. If you're not, then you're wiser to stay to the middle. As she made a point last night, I was watching her, she said that you know, she won like 8 of the last 11 primaries. Well, yeah, because Obama had locked up the nomination,
right,
and was listing back to the moderate center. He had to.
Yeah, she mentioned she had won 8 out of 12 or whatever it was at the end.
Yeah, and so it's a telling sign of where you sit with that.
It'll be interesting when you come back, because we'll be real close.
Yeah, we will be. We will be, absolutely.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, we thank you. Hope you'll all reach out to John in the last 6 months till we find out what he's going to do to help us, because I don't believe that he's just going to sit back and not help the town after how many decades he has. But as a preliminary, thank you for everything so far. And to our loyal viewers, all 6, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than today. Good night, all.